Today's webinar. My name is Sandra Upton, and I am with the Cultural Intelligence Center. Again, we want to thank you all so much for joining us today. We are privileged to have individuals here from all parts of the world throughout North America. We've got folks from Europe, Southeast Asia. So we just want to welcome you, and depending on where you are in the world, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. We are delighted that you're here. You will see here on this first welcome slide just a few tips that I want to remind you of before we get started with the webinar. First of all, the session is a live broadcast, as you can tell. However, we will be recording it, and the recorded version will be available after the session on the CQC, the Cultural Intelligence Center website. We have a fantastic team of panelists today, and I think they'll be sharing some insights that you'll find very interesting and helpful. And so we do want to offer the opportunity for you to be able to ask questions, but we're going to do that on the back end. But while you are listening to the presenters, you'll see that there is a small questions box on your screen. Feel free to begin typing in any questions that you might have throughout the presentation. And then again, on the back end, we'll come back and do our best to answer as many of those questions as possible. And due to the size of our audience, we cannot assist you with any technical challenges, but we've tried to be a little bit proactive by giving you some tips up front in case you have any types of issues, okay? So again, we will get started. So the title of today's webinar is Why Engineering Students Need CQ. CQ is short for Cultural Intelligence. And again, we've got some great we've got some great presenters today, and I'm going to give each of them an opportunity to introduce themselves. I will again just let you know that I am Sandra Upton. My official title is Vice President of Educational Initiatives with the Cultural Intelligence Center. So I oversee all of the work that we do in the education space across the globe. We are privileged here at the center to work with hundreds of universities and colleges, helping them to develop the cultural intelligence of their students, staff, and faculty. We work with many, many disciplines, and because we do, we wanted to take the opportunity to begin to sort of dissect and think about some of the specific needs within those different disciplines, which is why we are offering the webinar specific to engineering today. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to our other presenter, Robert Scott.
Thank you, Sandra, and good morning, everyone. Robert Scott here. I serve as the Director for Diversity Initiatives within the Center for Engineering, Diversity, and Outreach in the College of Engineering at the University of Michigan. This is actually a second career position for me. I've been in this role now for about 12 years. Before that, I was in industry working for 32 years at the Procter & Gamble company as an engineer, systems analyst, and ultimately an IT executive for Procter & Gamble. In that capacity, I have roles that took me around the world, including a 4-year assignment in Belgium and numerous global roles. And that's very germane to what we'll be talking about today, because as a Michigan Wolverine engineer, I was well prepared for a technology leadership role, but I was not prepared for working on a global scale. And that's one of the reasons why I've come back to Michigan and continue to be a part of that organization. So we'll hear a little bit more about that going forward. Sandra?
Thank you so much, Robert. And we will have Kelsey introduce herself.
Thanks so much, Sandra. And I'm Kelsey Mackie. I am the Education Account Manager here at the CQ Center, and I handle all of our current partnerships, working to grow and sustain our current partnerships. And for my portion of the webinar, I will be going over some resources and an overview of our CQ Learning Portal.
Thanks so much, Kelsey. Okay, so let's talk about what the agenda will be for the next 55 minutes. I'm going to kick us off by talking a little bit about why, more broadly, about why CQ matters for engineering students. And then Robert is going to jump in and really give you some great insights around how the University of Michigan College of Engineering has been integrating CQ into their D&I work, and what that will look like moving forward. I'm going to come back along with Robert and just talk a little bit more about some other best practices that you might want to consider as you think about the potential of integrating CQ into your school or College of Engineering. And then, as Kelsey mentioned, she'll come back around and just share with you some of the solutions and resources that you might be interested in using. And then we're going to jump into any questions that you might have regarding all of what has been shared over the session. So with that, I know we've got, as I looked at the list of participants, it was very exciting. Again, we have folks from all over the globe, but we also have a really nice combination of our existing partners. I recognize a number of the names here, our existing institutional partners, but also some new folks that are perhaps new to the cultural intelligence conversation. So I thought it might be helpful to at least make sure we're all on the same page in terms of what we mean when we talk about cultural intelligence. If we're looking at how do we make sure that we're developing the cultural intelligence of our engineering students, we all want to make sure, again, we know what that definition looks like. So you'll see here on the screen a very simple definition that we use at the Cultural Intelligence to define cultural intelligence, or CQ for short. And it is the capability to function and relate effectively in culturally diverse situations. Two key things that are in this definition that are really important. The first is the word capability, meaning it's a skill. It goes beyond the idea of making people more sensitive to or more aware of the need to work effectively across cultures. I can be sensitive, I can be aware, I can be open, but if I don't have the skills or the capability, then I'm going to be limited. So it's a capability, but once we develop that capability, it allows us to function and relate effectively in any culturally diverse situation. So whether you are talking national culture, you're looking at it on a global scale, you're looking at the diversity as it relates to race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, generational differences, whatever diversity characteristic you want to put in there, we know that as you develop your capability in terms of your CQ, it enables you to function effectively in any of those culture diverse situations or contexts. Okay, so when we talk about that, more specifically, there's a framework that we use. So you have your overall cultural intelligence, which we know, again, is a capability. We know that it is a capability that can be measured, and we know that it is a capability that we know predicts your ability to perform effectively across cultures. Very specifically, we look at 4 key capabilities within that CQ framework. The first is what we call CQ drive. That's all about, if we think about this within the context of an engineering student, it's all about that student's level of interest, persistence, and confidence when engaging across cultures. Then there's CQ knowledge. That's their understanding about how cultures are similar and how they're different. So I can be motivated and confident when working across cultures, but then what knowledge do I need to develop so that I understand what the similarities and differences might be represented in that engagement? The third capability is what we call CQ strategy, and that's all about a student's ability to be aware and plan for those interactions. So I need to be motivated, I need to develop some knowledge, but then I need to take that knowledge and identify a strategy for how I'm going to interact. And then the last capability is what we call CQ action, and that's all about your ability to adapt your behavior. So all 4 capabilities make up your overall CQ, but we are able to look at them very specifically and actually measure and see where you fall within the context of each of these, and then can help develop a strategy for how to improve. So why does it matter for engineering students? Before I jump into a few statistics that I want to share with you, I want to ask you the question. So now that you understand what the definition of cultural intelligence is, how well do you feel, here's the poll question that we're going to put up in a moment, but how well do you feel your college or school of engineering is preparing culturally intelligent students for the multicultural global world? How good of a job do you think you're doing? So we're going to roll this poll out, and I'd love for you to answer it, and we'll see what the results look like. Okay, we'll give it just another few seconds, and then if Eric can publish those, we can take a look at what the results are. Okay, so here we have the results. So you were given the option to answer either great, our efforts are fantastic, they're great, or they're just okay, or the last option was needs improvement. 8% of you said that your efforts are great, 28% of you said that your efforts were okay, and 64% of you said that your efforts need significant improvement. Again, we work with universities and schools all over the world, all of the time. And so these statistics do not surprise me, which again is why we wanted to do a webinar like this, because there is a huge gap in terms of how well we are preparing students for the global multicultural world. So thanks for sharing that. Again, that 64%, nearly two-thirds of you feel that there's significant opportunity for improvement. So with that, I want to talk a little bit about why CQ matters for engineering students. Obviously, one of the big reasons is that you feel like you aren't quite doing what you need to do to get students ready. But you know, there are a number of external factors that are influencing this conversation. The first is something that none of us, you know, is surprised by, the domestic shifts that are taking place both domestically and internationally. And that has been happening for quite some time. You know, here in the US, we know that the Latinx and the African American populations are continuing to increase. The Asian American population is as well. The white population is shrinking. And so we've got this tremendous amount of diversity that's growing just from a racial and ethnicity perspective. Right. Internationally, we would see some of those same types of shifts that are taking place in terms of cultural diversity. So those shifts have not gotten smaller, but they continue to get wider. And if we don't understand what's happening and recognize that we then have to shift how we think and how we engage and how we work, we're going to get left behind. All of us, you know, are being impacted by COVID-19. You know, we are slowly moving in a direction of being able to see our way out of this, but we all know that it's going to be a very long journey and process. But one of the things that COVID-19, it's taught us many things, but one of the things that it has absolutely taught all of us is that we are interconnected. So not only do we have these demographic shifts that are taking place across the globe, but we are completely unable to live in a bubble. We are interconnected in ways that we never thought we would be. And we know that one thing that can happen in one part of the world can very quickly and significantly have a major impact on many of us in other parts of the world. There was a recent report by the World Economic Forum, the WEF, that talked about the shifts that are taking place in terms of the workplace. And I thought one of the interesting statistics about that is just looking at the existing workforce, so not even new people that are going to be entering the workforce, but the existing workforce. The report argues that by 2022, which is just 2 years from now, 40%, 42% of core skills that are required to perform existing jobs are expected to change. So basically, the way that we currently do work now is going to shift significantly just in the next couple of years. Also, if you look at this second or third bullet point here, it says that much of the job growth is going to come from 7 professional areas. Care, you can see engineering being a big one, cloud computing, sales, marketing, and content, data, artificial intelligence, green jobs, people and culture, and specialized project managers. But again, noticing that engineering is one of those fields that will be growing significantly. But even with that, again, understanding that with the existing jobs, the expectations are going to be different in terms of the skills. But we're going to also be adding 133 million new jobs, including many of those will be engineering jobs. And so again, those new people entering into these new roles will also need to have this new set of skills. And this new set of skills is sort of being described by the World Economic Forum as sort of this need to do this reskilling or this reskilling revolution, right? So the set of skills that we have now, the technical skills that are really important, especially for engineering, are not going to be enough as we move forward. There's going to be a huge need for the soft side skills, and cultural intelligence is a big piece of that, to the point where as we move forward, it won't just be an option in terms of the expectation from employers, but it will be a requirement that as employees, existing employees and new employees, they will be expected to have a level of cultural intelligence in their work alongside the technical skills that they bring into that work environment. So I love this quote, it says there's a common misperception that we'll all need to develop highly technological or scientific skills to succeed. Yet while it will be necessary for people to work right with this technology, we're also seeing a growing need for people to develop specialized skills for how they interact with one another. So this need to be able to work effectively across cultures is going to continue to increase and be not, I would even say, not just as important as the technical skills, but even more important. And another reason why cultural intelligence is so important for students. So with that, I want to transition and have Robert begin to share with you how the University of Michigan over the last couple of years has integrated CQ into their program.
Okay, so again, thank you. And I want to start to describe a journey that Michigan College of Engineering has been on as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion in general, and the importance of CQ in that journey as we've gone forward. In that, I want to personalize this. As I mentioned before, I am actually a Michigan engineer. And so a lot of this is very personal to me. I've experienced our old way of developing engineers, and I'm very much a part of the new way of developing engineers. I went to the engineering school back in the 70s, and the main difference that I see between our curriculum and our academics today versus then is the importance of working in teams. Literally everything that we do is on the basis of working with others. And that is such a fundamental shift in how technology and technical work gets done, that's sort of driving the need for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Sandra, can you go forward to the next slide, please? So let me start off by just giving you a few facts about the University of Michigan and the College of Engineering. This slide here describes just the sheer size of the college. Michigan actually has roughly 55 to 60,000 students in 19 colleges and schools. The College of Engineering is one of the largest schools within the university, with just over 10,000 students, almost 700 faculty members, and 750 staff members. And the key message there is to recognize the fact that these students, faculty, and staff come from all over the world. They represent a wide spectrum of diversity, whether we're talking about gender diversity, socioeconomic diversity, race and ethnicity, international versus US, etc. And all of those things play out for our faculty, students, and staff. From a student standpoint, we're roughly 12% underrepresented minorities. Read that as African American, Hispanic, and Native American among the US population. We're roughly, for the university, at about 15% of our students are international students coming from abroad. The percentage is somewhat higher for our faculty. A larger percentage of our faculty come from international backgrounds. And while our staff is predominantly based out of North America, they've quickly learned that they have to have the skills and capability to work with people from all over the world, because all the faculty and the students represent this tremendous diversity. So a big school, a lot of diversity, important to be able to leverage that diversity to go forward from a creativity standpoint. Next slide, please. So the vision of the College of Engineering is to be the world's preeminent college of engineering, serving the common good. And there's a lot of interesting assumptions in this. So world's preeminent basically means that we play on a world stage, not a US stage. We want to be one of the best colleges of engineering on the planet, reaching people all across the planet. And this notion of serving the common good means that there is an understanding of what is good in terms of helping people survive and thrive on this planet. Thank you. We want to be at our best. Please go ahead to the next slide. We want to be at our best in terms of developing engineers. This means being clear around our people, understanding what our values are, understanding the importance of diversity and equity inclusion, in which every person is represented, that's diversity, every person is involved, that's equity, and everyone is able to participate to their fullest potential, that's inclusion. And so we've been working very hard to come up with a strategy to bring that to life. We also are a premier educational organization, which means we need to be excellent at education, we need to be excellent at research, and we need to sort of change the paradigm around how people can bring forward that excellence through creativity, innovation, and being daring, being able to step forward and take big chances and make big wins as we move the technology forward. We're a big school. We got a lot of facilities. We got a lot of classrooms, and we do a lot of research. All of this is predicated on the ability to connect people and enable people to be successful. And so we've got a strategy that's tied to how do we leverage the facilities capability that we offer on our campus as well. Next slide, please. So serving the common good means tackling the big problems. Tackling the big medical problems. COVID-19 is just one example of a really broader program of how do we change the question around health and healthcare. What is the role does technology play in enabling that to happen? But it's just one of many major problems that the world is struggling with, whether it's water and the availability of clean water for all of the people of the planet, urbanization and the impact that large cities are having on things like the climate and the impact of that on climate, rising sea levels and the potential impact on people around the increasing temperatures of the planet, aging infrastructure, and certainly social inequity and barriers to social mobility manifesting itself in poverty. All of these world problems have technology as a basis for helping to address them. But it's not about the technology, it's about how the technology gets applied. How does it get applied in context? Those are people issues and social issues, not technology issues. Engineers need to understand and be able to relate to social issues, people issues, in order to apply their technology in order to solve these kinds of problems. Next slide, please. So for us, this is meant to really focus in on how do we unleash the potential of all of our people at the university and in the college. You know, again, how do we make sure that we have the representation that truly represents the world that we're trying to serve, the diversity? How are we treating those people? Are they being treated equitably? Do we understand what they need in order to be successful? And are we enabling them through the processes and systems that the college runs to ensure that they are in fact treated equitably? And then even if they are treated equitably, if they don't feel like they're part of the team, if they're not part of the family, they won't perform to their fullest potential. So how do we ensure that everybody is feeling included? And this is the basis of the diversity, equity, and inclusion strategic plan that we launched 4 years ago. We're in year 4 of a 5-year plan that's aimed to address these. I have the fortune of being one of the co-leads for the College of Engineering in the implementation of the strategic plan to try and address this. Next slide. Why? Alec Gallimore is our Dean of Engineering, and I think it's really important to underscore his vision that diversity is not about charity, it's about staying competitive. In many institutions, diversity is seen as a moral good rather than a solution to a problem. The result, those institutions often miss out on talent and perspectives that would make them better at education and at research. Again, our vision is that we are the world's preeminent engineering school, which means we cannot afford to miss out on the talents and perspectives of anyone that could contribute to us solving those big, challenging problems that are facing the planet. Next slide. So our diversity strategic plan consists of several components. One component is to improve our culture, to look at our climate for faculty, students, and staff, to understand what's working well and what needs to be improved and how to improve it. Based on that, we need to increase our skills and experiences in understanding and relating to diversity, equity, and inclusion topics. Obviously, CQ is a big part of our efforts here to build our skills going forward. The next part of our strategy is to make sure that we truly do have a diverse community of students, faculty, and staff. Michigan is an elite institution. It's an expensive institution. We don't want to be an elitist institution. We want to be elite, but we don't want to be elitist. So how do we ensure that all students are welcome, regardless of their socioeconomic status and background, regardless of where they come from on the planet? How do we build a diverse community? And then what do we do with them once they arrive is a big part of our strategic plan. And then, of course, building capability. You can't build capability unless you have processes and you measure those processes. After all, we're engineers. That's what engineers do. They define processes and then they measure. They look at what those measures say. If those measures are not adequate, then they make improvements. That's the definition of engineering, is to solve problems by defining processes and improving them. So our strategic plan is an engineering plan aimed at improving our culture and what we do. Next slide. So with that in mind, we've taken a critical look at ourselves. And we noticed that there are some fundamental issues. While we have a lot of diversity, we don't have as much diversity as we think we need to have. Our underrepresented minority population isn't as large as we think it should be. Engineering is still a very tough discipline from a gender diversity standpoint. And women in engineering find it challenging to be successful. That's a diversity issue. That's a cultural issue that we need to address. There's issues between faculty working with staff from a class standpoint that gets rolled out time and time again. These are cultural issues that we know that we're dealing with. we have a lack of knowledge and experience in addressing these issues. And so we were very interested in finding a way to better understand what these issues are and what we could do about them to build the knowledge and skills to be able to move forward. Some of these issues manifest themselves in very specific climate issues. So small populations will feel isolated because the numbers are relatively low. It's hard to feel included if you can't look around and see people that look like you in positions of authority on the faculty, administration, etc. So this notion of isolation is an issue. Unconscious bias manifests itself in terms of how we do a lot of our engineering work. And I'll give an example here in a moment. But it's amazing how unconscious bias kind of permeates how we do project work, how we do research, how we make recommendations for promotion, how we make recommendations for graduate school, etc. These are very real issues that are just below the surface, but having a huge impact. Microaggressions are those unintended biases that manifest themselves in painful situations where the perpetrator is not necessarily intending to be vicious, but by the very nature of what they do or say, they add to the sense of isolation and feeling of rejected by members of our organization. And then the interesting dichotomy is we recruit the best students from around the world. These students are all wonderful, successful students, the top of their classes, and yet they have this internal bias that oftentimes triggers this notion of imposter syndrome. Am I good enough? Because suddenly students who have always been at the top of their class are finding themselves in classrooms with other students that are at the top, were at the top of their class. And so this notion of competitiveness magnifies itself and manifests itself in the minds of students and even faculty. And this notion of, am I really here as an imposter and I'm going to get found out, can impact them. And the moment that that kind of enters into your head, you're no longer capable of working at your best. And so this is an issue. Next slide. Let me talk a little bit about how unconscious bias can manifest itself in engineering. I mentioned up front that all work gets done in teams now. Well, how are these teams formed? Who selects the team members? And are those team members being selected on the basis of some unconscious bias that tends to have people reach out and identify people that look like them, think like them, and pull forward into teams at the expense of others who are no longer selected? We've also seen on a number of our project teams where individuals are selected for roles within the team based on unconscious bias. So the technical expert on a project team tends to be a white male, whereas the presenter or the person that works on the slides or the report are some of the women on the teams. And it happens more often than we care to realize that this unconscious bias is impacting who gets what roles on project teams. There's been a number of studies shown that letters of recommendations have biases inherently in them. Again, in engineering, it tends to manifest itself along gender lines, where researchers that get letters of recommendation talk about the strength of the technical skills. If it's a man, it talks about their collaboration skills and their team building skills if it's a woman. Nothing wrong with team building skills or collaboration skills, but why not talk about the technical expertise of women or the collaboration and team building skills of men? And we've seen that manifest itself in unconscious bias on several occasions. It also actually works into how research hypotheses are put together and how the data is analyzed and conclusions are drawn that have these notions of unconscious bias buried in them. And we've seen that time and again. Next slide, please. So with all this as a backdrop, we've adopted CQ as one of our fundamental strategies for moving forward to address our climate and those issues that I talked about. We started by having CQ training for senior college leaders, associate deans and members of our diversity, equity, inclusion leadership team to ratchet up their understanding of these issues and to begin to build skills with them. That led to us investing in resources so that we could have more capability within the college to be able to address the training needs. We went on and had certified facilitators, facilitators certified for both teaching CQ as well as unconscious bias. And we're leveraging those certified resources, those facilitators, to be able to do programs within the college for college faculty and staff, including CQ as well as cultural values training. And now we're coming back with unconscious bias training for students and staff as well. These are regular programs now that we've done over the last 2.5 years and will continue to do going forward so that we can build a base level of knowledge and experience about these issues and topics and skills so that we can come together from a strategy standpoint. So let me stop there, Sandra, and that's sort of a quick synopsis of what's been going on at the college. I'll turn it back to you.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Robert. And again, if you have questions already in your mind based on what I've shared, as well as what Robert has shared, please begin to post those in the questions box, and we're going to come to those in a bit. As I transition and talk a little bit about some other ideas and strategies for integrating CQ, I wanted to just really kind of follow up with a few things that Robert said. I think it's really important when we talk about why students need or engineers need CQ. You can see that U of M is sort of taking this approach on what I call sort of both ends of the stick, right? There's this immediate need to create this inclusive, diverse environment. So U of M has done quite a bit in terms of making sure that faculty and staff are developing their cultural intelligence so that they are creating this inclusive environment where every student is feeling a sense of welcome, feeling a sense of belonging and feeling included, and they're thriving. So that's that front end that in the immediate, the college has to make a very intentional effort and put together an intentional strategy to make sure that that inclusion piece is there. But then there's the other piece of how are we making sure that we are preparing students for when they leave. And you heard Robert talk about how they have begun to now integrate CQ training with students. So they are receiving training around cultural intelligence, cultural values, which I'll talk about in just a moment, and then also going to be introducing unconscious bias training. So they're tackling this on both ends, the immediate need to create this inclusive environment, but also making sure that they are positioning students to have the necessary cultural intelligence once they go out into the global multicultural work world. I thought I would also share with you that outside of University of Michigan, there are other schools of engineering that are integrating CQ and are seeing some great success. And I wanted to highlight one, which is Virginia Tech. They actually did an impact study based on the work that they were doing around cultural intelligence. And again, it really just highlighted not only the value of CQ, but the importance of what we call intervention strategies in that process, and how ultimately it really created some great results. And so they built a course called Global Engineering. And you'll see it's in very small print here, but the syllabus or the beginning of the syllabus for this particular course. But it was designed to, again, expose students to global engineering and also build in some content that will help them work to improve their cultural intelligence. So students actually had to complete the CQ assessment, which is a tool that we offer. It is the only academically validated tool in the world that measures cultural intelligence. So they built that assessment into the program as a pre and post. So students took it early on in the program and then eventually took it again on the back end. But in between those two assessments is what's most critical. And again, that's what we call these intervention strategies. And you can see a long list of efforts, activities that they put in place to ensure that students would have the opportunity to improve their cultural intelligence as part of this course. So students participated in a study abroad experience. They did group projects. You heard Robert talk earlier about how once students graduate and they go into the workplace, a big part of what they will be doing is working in teams and working in very diverse teams. So it was awesome to see that Virginia Tech built in a series of group projects where students had to work through different tasks and activities with a very diverse team. They invited industry speakers to talk with students about the engineering field, and those industry speakers were diverse, right? They had a host of in-class activities and assignments, and then I love that they actually had engineers from other countries be interviewed by students. And then on the back end, students had to do a reflective assignment that's really critical. And then ultimately, again, they took the post version of the assessment. So a very well thought out, put together program course that integrated CQ, designed to improve the cultural intelligence of the students. And they saw very favorable results in terms of student CQ scores increasing as a result of the work that they did here. The second thing that I wanted to highlight, just to begin to get you to think about what could this look like on your campus, in your School of Engineering, and in your courses. You heard Robert mention that in addition to CQ training and unconscious bias training, they've been doing quite a bit of work around cultural values. When a student takes the CQ assessment, there's a portion of that assessment that includes what we call cultural values. There's been a lot of research done looking at cultural values. We've added to that research. And so you can see here a sample of what the cultural values portion of the report will look like. So basically we look at 10 sets of values that are very common globally. And you probably are familiar with many of these: individualism versus collectivism, low uncertainty avoidance versus high uncertainty avoidance. We are able to look at these 10 sets of values and then also look both globally, and we can also look at this nationally, specifically looking at the US, but look at different regions, or what we call global clusters around the world, and see where those clusters fall on the continuum when we look at these sets of values. And it gives students a tremendous amount of insight just in terms of what are some of the cultural differences. Remember earlier I talked about CQ knowledge being one of those core parts of that framework. But what are some of the cultural differences and similarities that might be represented in the groups that I'm working with or the projects that I'm working on? And how might I use that information to inform how I need to adjust my strategy for working with you and how I need to adjust my behavior for working with you? This alone can be very powerful for students in the classroom. And so as an example of an activity that you could build into your course, you could help students map out their diversity by having them complete the assessment or just the cultural values portion of the assessment. They can look at these global clusters and see where they fall on the continuum. But then as they are answering questions, this little triangle that you see on the screen actually shows them where they fall. So they can look at their own set of cultural values and then how, again, those map out and compare to the cultural diversity of their teams that they're going to be working on. And then again, fast forward, thinking about when they're out in the workplace and they're working and leading teams, understanding that can be incredibly helpful to enhance the effectiveness of their work and of their leadership. So just another example of a very specific activity and some great content that can help students begin to see the importance of understanding the differences with those individuals that they may be working with. So with that, I want to now transition over to Kelsey and have her spend the next 5 minutes or so. You actually have close to 10, Kelsey, if you need that. But the next few moments to talk about just some of the solutions that you might find helpful should you decide to look at CQ as a strategy for helping your students grow.
Thanks so much, Sandra. So as you mentioned, I am just going to briefly highlight a few of our assessment tools and e-learning courses that best fit the need for student development. We've also recently put together something we call a solutions map to make navigating all the products and resources we offer more user-friendly for our partners. And then I'm also going to provide a very quick overview of our learning portal. For those of you who are new to CQ in our system, the portal houses all of your CQ purchases. It's where you'll launch your assessments and be able to track which participants have completed the assessment or e-learning. Next slide. Great, so this is our solutions map. We'll offer this tool to anyone who'd like access to it after the webinar. This map is interactive. It links to additional information such as downloadable brochures for each solution. And next slide. And as Sandra mentioned, of course, we have our CQ assessment. For the CQ assessment, it's the only academically validated tool to assess cultural intelligence and competency. The pro version of our assessment measures both CQ as well as personal cultural value preferences, also known as CVs. This assessment shows participants that CQ is a skill and shows them their strengths and weaknesses so they can improve their CQ. And of course, we have our pre-post assessment, which measures a learner's CQ, how it can change over time. This can be used to measure change as a student enters a program and how CQ intervention strategies helped improve their CQ upon graduation. Many of our partners also use it before and after a study abroad or domestic stay program to measure change and growth. And you can go to the next slide. MyCQ is one of our e-learning courses. This course typically takes 2.5 hours for a learner to complete. It includes quizzes, videos, lectures to give students a deeper dive into understanding their CQ and CV. And it actually maps their assessment data directly into the course for a personalized and customized experience. And you can go to the next slide. MyUB, Recognize and Manage Bias. This course is a 1-hour e-learning that teaches the learner how to use their CQ skills to manage unconscious bias. It teaches them to recognize bias in themselves and others and develop the skills to interpret bias. Next slide. We also have CQ Go. This is actually one of our latest product releases. It's a 1-hour course specifically designed for international students studying at Western universities. It provides them with real-life examples and strategies to succeed inside and outside the classroom. And that's a really exciting new product we've launched. And you can go to the next slide, Sandra. Great, now what I'm gonna do is just really quickly give you a snapshot of our learning portal. Your CQ dashboard is your home base for your programs, and it's where, again, all of your assessments, resources, and e-learning purchases live. This right here is just a quick snapshot of what your landing page looks like on your dashboard. And then I'm also going to walk through the steps for configuring your assessment license upon completing a purchase. And next slide. So this is just a little example of a CQ dashboard. For today's session, I'm just going to focus on groups, programs, and licenses tab. And then these steps up top, those are really quickly the steps for how to configure a license. So your first step would be to create a group. A group can be thought of as a department or college within a university that's using assessments. Many of our partners organize their groups by each semester. And then within groups are programs. Programs can be thought of as each class or cohort of students you're using and launching the assessments for. And then the next steps I'm going to go over in the following slides are how to configure that license, add assessments to a desired group, actually create that program, and then of course invite students to complete the assessment. You can go to the next slide. All right, so step 3. So then your next step would be to go to your licenses tab, and this is where all of your assessment and e-learning purchases will live. And then what you'll do is you'll click that configure license button, and then you can add as many assessments you need to that desired group. And then if we go to the next slide, Sandra, what you'll then do is create your program. So then you'll click that Create Program button, and then you'll see all the assessments that you've populated to that group. And then you will be asked to fill in some required information to set up your program. And next slide. And then what you'll do is you'll click on that program you've just created under your Programs tab. You'll see that some general information on the program you've created. This is where you'll download all your feedback reports upon your students completing the assessment. And this is where you'll also download learning statistics if you have an e-learning that is a part of that program. You'll then see a participant options drop-down menu, and that's where you'll invite participants to that program to complete the assessment. Go to the next slide. And then the last step will really be just to invite your students to complete the assessment. You can either enter in email addresses, or you can upload the roster for your class that you are launching the program for. And then under the Participants tab, you'll see all the students' information there, if they've accepted the invite to complete the assessment, when they completed, if they haven't yet completed it. You can also resend the invitations to any students who have not accepted the invite to complete the assessment. And that is the learning portal and your dashboard in a nutshell. And yeah, thanks so much, Sandra. I think now we're going to go to a question and answer portion.
Great, thank you so much, Kelsey. And hopefully that information was helpful for you if you are thinking about integrating CQ. Just wanted to give you some ideas around some of the solutions and strategies that are available. So we have gotten some really good questions here, and I'm going to go through and read them. And some I certainly can respond to, but there are a few that I definitely want Robert to jump in and add his insights. So the first question is there evidence that shows diverse teams are better at innovation and creativity, right? I accept that diverse teams can problem solve better than homogeneous or heterogeneous teams. Fantastic question, because there actually is quite a bit of research around this. And what the research suggests is, and this may surprise you, and I want you to hear my whole response to this, but the research actually tells us that homogeneous teams, when we talk about diversity, just diversity alone, right, in terms of, and when we say diversity, we're talking about representation, right, of different cultures and different groups that are working together, perhaps. Diversity alone is actually not enough. And the research actually tells us that diverse teams actually do not outperform homogeneous teams. In fact, homogeneous teams outperform diverse teams. The qualifier there is that when cultural intelligence is added, that is the game changer, right? So homogeneous teams in general outperform diverse teams. So just because you have a beautiful mosaic of people from different backgrounds, different cultures, different experiences, if that group lacks cultural intelligence, which again is the capability to function effectively in diverse situations, if they lack cultural intelligence, that they are no more effective than that homogeneous team. In fact, the homogeneous team is more diverse. When you add cultural intelligence to the dynamics, so they're diverse, but then they have the skills on how to leverage that diversity, homogeneous teams can't come close to that diverse team in terms of innovation, creativity, leadership, judgment, decision making, a whole host of performance outcomes that are generated as a result of that diversity combined with cultural intelligence. So you need both if you're going to really maximize and leverage those differences. The second question is, how does the CQ trainings, or how are those CQ trainings conducted when it comes to students or staff? I'll let Robert jump in and talk about how they've done it, and then I may add something to that. But how have you conducted trainings with students and staff at U of M, Robert?
Sure. So we've consciously went after subset groups that tend to work together. Maybe not in the exact same unit, but certainly close enough so that they have a shared experience. And those folks are invited to a session to understand exactly what we're trying to do, why we're trying to do it. We follow that up with the actual assessment. And then we do a workshop debrief that at minimum of 4 hours, more typically an all-day workshop, to not only understand the assessment, but the so what behind the assessment. What is the assessment really telling us, and what kind of action planning can you do as a direct result of that? Again, we've tended to form up work groups to do this. So for example, the staff involved with grad education have attended sessions together. The student leaders of project teams have come together as part of their training and development responsibility as leaders for teams. We brought them together and had them go through a shared experience. So it really depends upon the outcome that you're going, but context is very important, and we try very hard to put in context. So it isn't just training for training's sake, but it's actually a shared experience that we're trying to build with the groups that are going through.
That's fantastic. I think those are all great strategies. And the only other thing that I would add, especially given sort of the uncertainty that we all are experiencing right now, and as we think about going into the fall, none of us completely know what our campuses are going to look like. And so I think another strategy around the training is to think about some blended models, right? And some e-learning, which is why Kelsey sort of walked you through some of the e-learnings that we offer, because the reality is that some of you may not be going back physically on campus, or again, there's some kind of hybrid model where some e-learning can take place. And so that can be a great resource when you're talking about trainings with both students and staff and faculty. Another question is, how do we start this with leadership if they don't even know anything about CQ or really understand the need? Fantastic question. And I'll let Robert chime in, but I'll just jump in by first say that I think the key is to try your best, if at all possible, to start with leadership. If CQ is not currently being used or integrated at your institution, ideally you want to start with leadership. And I would suggest some kind of pilot session. You may not be able to get an audience with them for a half a day, which is what a typical training would look like. Maybe you can get an hour or 2 hours, but use that time to really help them understand what cultural intelligence is and why it's important. Why is it important for the institution from a immediate need in terms of diversity and inclusion and equity, and then why it's critical that there is a commitment to make sure that those students, the engineering students, are graduating with cultural intelligence. So try and get that group together, even if it's for, again, a short amount of time, and really focus on helping them understand what is cultural intelligence, how is it different from the broader conversation around cultural competence, and then why is it important for that department, and why is it important for students? Anything you want to add to that, Robert?
I'll amplify what you said. I really think it's critically important that leaders, the word leader means leading, and this is a leadership issue. And so I really do believe that it is important for leaders to be upfront as this transition, as this program gets going. I will tell you that we consciously created a context so that we weren't talking about CQ as the end all, but rather our strategic plan. Here's what we were trying to do with our strategic plan. And our strategic plan was about creating this kind of an environment, and it's about building creativity, innovation, and daring. As soon as you start to use the language that the leaders are using around their vision for where they're trying to take the organization, it gets much easier to then say, oh, by the way, this drives what it is you're trying to create. And that's what we did. We brought a tremendously fantastic leader in to teach our leadership. Her name is Sandra Upton. She came in and she met with our leadership team and took us through a 4-day session. And that really sort of set the stage, but it's all about context. Don't make this another program. It is an integral part of the strategic program that you're trying to do.
Fantastic. Thank you, Robert. Another question was related to how does this get integrated into the curriculum? The slide that I showed you a moment ago with Virginia Tech is a really good example of how they integrated this into the curriculum. They built it into they created a course basically, and put a lot of work into, you could tell they did quite a bit of mapping in that course and did a lot of work in terms of integrating CQ into that. So I think that's a good model that if you don't have the influence or the opportunity to do something that detailed up front, there are still other things you can do, even if it's just building the assessment in and having students take the assessment at the beginning of a course just to see what their cultural intelligence is and then help them understand. We have resources to support you in debriefing that assessment with them and helping them understand what their results mean, and then just helping them think about a few strategies that they can put in place for how to improve their cultural intelligence. So that's sort of a first step, basic level. And then the extreme end of that is, again, the case study that I shared with you from Virginia Tech. Another question, do we start with staff or students or leaders? I would argue that you start with leadership and staff, and so that you position them to be able to model the way. It's one thing to tell students you need cultural intelligence, but yet they are walking into a classroom where it's clear that the faculty member doesn't have cultural intelligence, or their experiences outside of the classroom clearly demonstrate that leadership is not committed to this and they lack cultural intelligence. So the ideal scenario would be to have leadership and staff go through this first, or doing it concurrently could be an option, but I would say you want to make sure that you have your leadership and staff literally leading the way in this work. And is there anything you want to add to that, Robert? We are at the top of the hour, but any other few comments you want to add to that before we wrap up?
I'll be real brief. Students are watching. If they don't see leaders and staff doing this, they dismiss it. So you really do need to have them there.
Fantastic. Thank you. Time is up. Great questions. Thank you for being a part of this. One other quick question was, does the assessment come in other languages? And the answer is yes. So if you want to know more details about that, you can either reach out to our team, Kelsey, who you've heard from. You can see her information here along with her email address. She focuses mostly on our work with our existing partners. Eric Schuler, who is also behind the scenes today, but here on the call, he works with all of our new partners. So if you've not done any work with the Cultural Intelligence Center in the past, he would be the person that you would want to talk to. But for the person that asked that question about multiple languages, depending on if you're an existing or new, reach out to Kelsey or Eric and they can explain to you exactly what languages we do offer the assessment in, and there are multiple languages. So with that, thank you so much again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening, and stay safe and healthy. Thank you.